If you're watching this in the future, you might be thinking, golly gee, Del Toro is not a saint. He just said the most heinous thing on Twitter the other day. He's been accused of the most egregious crimes. He's hashtag canceled, but I have a hard time believing he'd do something unforgivable. As far as I know, he's a nice guy. He seems really chill. Everyone who's ever worked with him says he's a joy to be around, but I don't know the guy. I can't speak to his personal virtues or flaws. I'm not his friend at time of recording. I'm just a very passionate admirer of his work, and based on writing and interviews I've read from him, he's someone who I think I'd share a lot of opinions and likes and dislikes with. And I'm far from alone here. He's now one of the many auteurs who any filmmaker worth their salt will take notice of. He's another white dude who makes movies that win awards. He's been canonized. He's a saint. The pop cultural understanding of a saint is someone of unblemished virtue, a holy example to live up to. But if you looked at these saints from a modern historical perspective, some of them turn out to be real bastards, like Junipero Serra, agent of colonialism, or Cyril of Alexandria, who had the scientist Hypatia murdered. Even Mother Teresa isn't universally loved. While they have values as symbols, they were still people, by nature imperfect. But Del Toro's saints don't pretend to be perfect. I'm not trying to elevate a white dude to religious importance, because it wasn't me who canonized him. But maybe it can be me who beatifies him. I just want to exalt and praise the miracles of his craft, and explain why I hold his films so close to my heart, like beads on a rosary. Part 1. Careermo del Bio.
Whatever. Okay, good. Okay. Who is that guy? Every take, he comes up to me and says something or other. Who is it?
Guillermo del Toro Gomez was born October 9th, 1964, in Guadalajara, Mexico. He lived with his grandmother for several years, where he received a strict Catholic upbringing. Like most children, he believed he saw monsters hiding in every corner. One very formative memory for him was the night when he stood up in his crib and cried out into the darkness, "If you leave me alone, I'll be your friend forever." A perfect illustration of the kind of environment he was raised in would be a supermarket newsstand where he would see Alarma, an extremely graphic crime tabloid, next to Archie Comics. This cover's pretty tame, by the way. Google Alarma magazine if you really do not want to sleep tonight. Okay, stop me if you've heard this one before. When this famous director was a child, they made home movies with a Super 8 camera and fell in love with film. Yep, that was Del Toro too. He made 10 short films before his first feature, but only 2 have been made public: the crime thriller Doña Lupe and the supernatural horror Geometria.
Il tuo secondo desiderio era per l'esame di geometria. Quindi lancio che ti dice che un pentagono magico no, tiene 5 lati. Che li hai disegnato tu e ne sei. E si chiama Hexagono. Considera il lato buono. Non dovrai più giudicare geometria.
He studied film at the University of Guadalajara and would write and direct a few episodes of La Hora Marcada, basically Mexico's answer to The Twilight Zone. It was here that he met Alfonso Cuarón, who along with Alejandro González Iñárritu would form the Three Amigos, the Mexican directors who later took Hollywood by storm. Del Toro also spent 10 years working as a special effects makeup artist after studying under the legendary Dick Smith. In 1993, he released his first feature, Cronos. The film was a critical success, and during this time he became friends with actor Ron Perlman and director James Cameron. And when I say friends, I don't mean that lightly. In 1997, Del Toro was given a $30 million deal by Miramax to produce Mimic. At the same time, his father, Federico, was kidnapped and held for ransom. Cameron withdrew $1 million from the bank to help pay, since Del Toro sunk everything he had into Cronos. Federico was released, but the kidnappers were never found and the money never recovered. On top of this, Del Toro's production was constantly criticized by the Weinsteins, with several heated arguments that almost resulted in him being fired. Del Toro said of that heinous year, 2 horrible things happened in the late 90s. My father was kidnapped, and I worked with the Weinsteins. I know which one was worse. The kidnapping made more sense. I knew what they wanted. This led to Cameron almost getting in a fistfight with Harvey Weinstein at the Oscars, and Ron Perlman infamously pissed on his hand before shaking it with Weinstein. We could all use friends like Perlman and Cameron. Fortunately, this wasn't the end of Del Toro's film career. He went on to direct banger after banger: The Devil's Backbone, Blade 2, Hellboy and Hellboy 2, The Golden Army, Pan's Labyrinth, Pacific Rim, Crimson Peak, and of course, the Oscar-darling Creature from the Black Lagoon AU Happy Ending fanfic. He's currently finishing up 2 films, an adaptation of the psychological noir novel Nightmare Alley, and a stop-motion adaptation of Pinocchio. He's also written books, produced TV shows, and worked on video games, so the man stays busy.
Okay, it's time to get out of here. I mean, look at that guy.
My boys sprung from my lungs, fully formed. One of them babies tried to eat me. I ate him first.
While he's celebrated for the films he's made, he's almost as well known for the films he didn't make. There's an entire Wikipedia article dedicated to charting the films that either got handed to other filmmakers or never made it past pre-production. The most mourned of these are his adaptations of The Hobbit and At the Mountains of Madness, as well as the conclusion to the Hellboy trilogy. The Hobbit films did get made eventually, but we all know how that went.
I mean, it's the hardest decision I've ever taken. I have incredible heartache. I feel terrible about it. It's very hard. It's getting a little easier to talk about it, but essentially it's like you've been recently widowed and everybody asking you exactly how your wife died.
Why does it hurt so much?
Because it was real.
I will remember you.
Part 2. Art and Craft. Okay, confession time.
Bless me, Father Thrice.
Sin, yes and no. You're very good at that.
I'm not the best at analyzing all of the technical things about movies, like cinematography, editing, and sound design, unless they're calling attention to themselves, or if I've seen the movie multiple times. To me, it's like trying to reverse engineer a roller coaster while I'm riding it.
You have to have a visual basis, very strong, and then in collaboration, you basically said, look, this is what I have. If there's something better, we'll take it. If there's nothing better, we'll pursue this. And you enter a dialogue that is done in a very simple way, which is I encourage every idea, and the only rule is at the end of the day, I'm right. You know, it's extremely simple because it's not about you, it's not me, it's the movie. You're the only one that is not going to be territorial. The director is the only one that is not just production design, just wardrobe, just acting, just you are everyone. You know, you're not God, you're Moses. You have the 10 Commandments. The movie gave them to you.
While Del Toro tries not to be territorial when dealing with his collaborators, he's very particular about the cinematography and set design. With cinematographers, the typical split is that they focus on the lighting, but he dictates camera movement, placement, lensing, and composition. The cinematic style varies depending on the story he's trying to tell. For example, in The Devil's Backbone, he tried to keep the camera below shoulder level as much as possible, framing the story as being from the point of view of children. For The Shape of Water, he wanted the camera to flow like water or an old Hollywood musical. He rarely keeps the camera completely stable, allowing for some kind of movement in almost every shot. Yet he tries to be conservative about what he calls underlining in all caps. For example, he considers a push-in to be underlining, while a crane shot is all caps. Del Toro's use of color is very idiosyncratic. 3 colors that predominate every single film are blue, gold, and red. The blue and gold are usually the dominant colors, with red symbolizing something that stands out, with a different meaning in each film. In Cronos, red is used to symbolize the blood that Jesus' vampirism causes him to crave. In The Shape of Water, red symbolizes love. Crimson Peak has the most overt color symbolism. Gold is used to represent the New World, America, independence, with Edith wearing golds and other bright colors, even when she moves to Allerdale Hall. Dark greens and blues symbolize the Old World, Europe, the decaying aristocracy. Red symbolizes the past coming back to haunt the present, manifesting itself both as the ghosts and the red clay that the Sharps are mining. I mean, the title of the film literally refers to the red clay coming up from the ground, the past resurfacing in the present. Speaking of Crimson Peak, it's an interesting example of the intersection between set design and costume design. Lucille's dresses are meant to be a reflection of the mansion, mirroring some of the architectural flourishes. In fact, Del Toro considers costume design to be a bridging element between cinematography and production design. In the wide shot, costume design acts as a compositional element. In the close-up, the costume is the set that the actor is working with, so he tries to make sure that each costume has details that one notices in close-up that they might not have noticed in the wide. Del Toro is very, very picky about production design. He often warns his production designers ahead of time that they're probably not going to get along during filming, but in the end, they'll be happy with the final product. He views production design as going hand in hand with story. The spaces characters inhabit either shape or are shaped by them. He hates filming on location, and whenever he can, he wants to film on a soundstage, where every single element is under control. He wants to create an immersive, unified world, even in stories that shift between fantastical and mundane settings. Pan's Labyrinth goes back and forth between the realm of the fairies and the harsh reality of Civil War Spain, but he deliberately wanted it to still feel like a fairy tale in the mortal world. The massive gears of the mill where Captain Vidal has set up his office feel just as otherworldly as the labyrinth or the Pale Man's banquet hall. This man creates some of the most horrific creatures in cinema, but what does he have nightmares about? Set design.
Look, I have a, you know, when you were a kid, you had the recurring nightmare that you show up at school and you have no pants, right? I have a recurring nightmare that I come to the set and the set is wrong. I do, I have it. I come to the set because to me, I'm a set builder. I'm almost like a production designer in disguise. I love sets. I love building them. I love seeing them. I love the detailing of them. And I have a dream over and over again where I go, this is it. This is the set that is going to kill me.
A time when sound design was very critical was Eliza's sign language monologue. He labored with the cast and crew to get this scene right, each time focusing on a different aspect of performance and sound. Since Eliza is mute, her breathing and the percussive sounds of her hands have to carry the weight usually done by a vocal performance.
What am I? I move my mouth like him. I make no sound like him. What does that make me? All that I am, all that I've ever been, brought me here to him. See, you're saying him. It's a him now. It's a... you just hit me. Oh, Eliza, let go of me. I'm looking. You've never quite hit me.
A crucial aspect also considered was the music. The film's composer, Alexandre Desplat, decided to scale the music back, letting it softly come in only when absolutely necessary. The result is one of the most emotionally effective scenes in the film.
I am incomplete. He sees me for what I am, as I am. He's happy to see me. Every time. Every day. And now, I can either save him him die.
Very early on, it was clear for Guillermo and I that the music should be just the voice of love, trying to add to that a sense of longing, because you know when impossible love is hurting you, there's a pain in your chest, and the water, because the water is always present, from the bathtub to the sea, feeling this. We know when you swim in tropical water, you barely feel the water on your skin, and I just tried to figure out that with the instrumentation, the way the melody plays in waves, the chord changes, the softness of the instrumentation, flutes, the whistle and the accordion. It's all instruments with air. You know, they all have something very organic. We never had to battle, never had. There was not one moment of battle. It was all, as the film, flowing and smooth and beautiful. There were some tweaks, you know, when the orchestra plays at Abbey Road, the London Symphony, sometimes there's something that can be a bit less, a bit more, but it's, micro things.
Del Toro places a lot of trust in his composers. He writes screenplays listening to film scores or music he feels complements the stories he's telling, creating playlists for each of them, but crucially, he does not make the composers listen to that music and copy it. Directors trying to force composers to make music sound like their temp music is why a lot of scores these days are forgettable. I mean, I don't need to tell you that, we all saw that one Every Frame a Painting video. Del Toro will tell the composers the general vibe and might even name a composer or two, but he lets them do their own thing. The lullaby motif from Pan's Labyrinth is essential to the tone of the film, and Javier Navarrete delivered. Pacific Rim is an homage to kaiju movies and mecha anime, so naturally, these were combined by Ramin Djawadi to create one of the most epic main themes in all of cinema. In Pacific Rim, they do a great job of making the Jaegers feel like they have a real weight to them, and move like actual machines. They move in a slightly staggered fashion, and we often cut to the inside where we see the pilots moving at full speed, showing the delay between input and execution. It not only creates a sense of realism, but also tension or even suspense. A lot of superhero movies and action films get criticized for not having any real stakes because the characters seem to be all-powerful. But here we see even these giant robots have limitations that can be deadly when fighting living creatures that are naturally way more agile. For the Blade and Hellboy movies, since they were doing comic book films before they were in vogue like they are today, Del Toro decided to honor their roots by making the action over the top and graphic. His Hellboy films are arguably straight-up action comedies.
Red Bean, stop!
Edgar Wright wasn't a household name yet, and I don't know how Del Toro feels about Jackie Chan, so where did he get the inspiration for his comedic action? Looney Tunes, of course.
Screw this!
Del Toro believes in editing day by day as opposed to waiting until production is wrapped. He developed this habit on the set of Mimic because he was paranoid that he would get fired by Tarantino's pervert sugar daddy. Not only did he want to prove to the studios that the film would be finished according to schedule, but he wanted to establish trust with the actors. He wanted to show them how each scene would look in the final product. He's gotten to the point where they'll usually have the first cut of the film ready about a week or two after wrap. Del Toro's meticulous shooting style means that there's usually little coverage, and the dailies will pretty much tell the editor how to cut them. However, he still gives the editors ultimate creative freedom.
No, I think that it's vital to have a dialogue. It's vital. You don't know all the answers. You know all the wrong ones. Yeah, so you can identify them, but you want to hear everybody's ideas. This is not a dictatorship. It's truly a collaboration. I think the only dictator is the movie.
Part 3. Authority and Perfection. Brace yourself, folks. We're about to get thematic, which means we're about to spoil most of Del Toro's movies. His films aren't usually very twisty, so I don't feel bad about spoiling them, but some people really care about that stuff. There's also going to be some gore and violence as well. We'll touch on some heavy themes like fascism, bigotry, incest, child abuse, and more. Some of you might be wondering, oh no, she's not about to make Del Toro movies political, is she? Well, newsflash, asshole! He's been political the entire goddamn time! Before we continue, 2 of Del Toro's films are set during the Spanish Civil War, which I had never even heard of until I became a fan of his work. So, in case you went to American public school like I did, here's a brief primer. Spain was in an almost constant state of war throughout the 19th century thanks to Napoleon and conflicts between liberal, anarchist, and monarchist factions. There was a period of peace following the Bourbon Restoration from 1874 to 1931. Then, after losing all of their colonies, the monarchy fell and the Second Spanish Republic was declared. This pissed off right-wingers, and in 1936, civil war broke out. On the left was the Republican faction. On the right was the Nationalist faction. Nationalist General Francisco Franco was all like, Hitler, Mussolini, please help me. And with the help of his fellow fascists, Franco became dictator of Spain and ruled until he died in 1975. Then everyone promised not to bring it up so the country could finally heal. Which is stupid! You can't just go back to normal and pretend everything's fine just because one bad man's not in office anymore. The villains in Del Toro movies are usually agents of some kind of authority. Dieter LaGuardia, the main villain in Cronos, is a vampire twice over. Not only does he covet the Cronos device, a clockwork mechanism that gives you immortality if you feed it blood, but he's also an industrial capitalist coming to drain money out of post-NAFTA Mexico. Vampires tended to be represented as rich aristocrats back in the day because they speak to a sort of class antagonism. But nowadays, we don't get ornate castles and Count Dracula. We get Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, office chic and corporate art styles. Jacinto in The Devil's Backbone grew up a miserable orphan, and now that he's an adult, he can make other orphans miserable too. Rasputin in Hellboy went from serving the Tsars in imperialist Russia to the Nazis, manipulating each of them for his own ends and attempting to influence Hellboy. Nuada in Hellboy 2 is a prince who wants to be king of a new world ruled by supernatural creatures. Captain Vidal in Pan's Labyrinth is the physical embodiment of fascism, pretty much meeting all the criteria laid out by Umberto Eco. The Sharps in Crimson Peak are incestuous aristocrats willing to kill just to keep up the appearance of prestige, with Lucille being the worst of the two by virtue of being older and manipulating her younger brother Thomas. Finally, there's Strickland from The Shape of Water, striving to be his best all-American self, embodying the very worst of white 60s anti-communist patriarchy. Even the kaiju in Pacific Rim are revealed to be living weapons sent by a hostile alien force that wants to colonize Earth. That may sound like your bog-standard alien invasion plot, and in the film that's kind of all we really get, but Del Toro wanted to subtly model the aliens after European aristocrats and Catholic priests, to evoke the colonization of the Americas, but most people just saw them as Independence Day ripoffs. And what does Del Toro fear, other than bad set design? The LAPD.
The Los Angeles police scares the crap out of me.
Del Toro considers fairy tales and horror to be inextricably linked with each other, and views them both as being deeply political. Fairy tales are often meant to scare children into proper behavior, or teach them how to behave in civilized society. Don't go into the woods, don't talk to strangers, listen to your parents, stay in a marriage you aren't happy in, obey the word of God. Some of those, in the right context, aren't 100% bad, and that's why Pan's Labyrinth acknowledges these nuances. Ophelia is promised that she will be able to live in the world of the fairies if she obeys the faun's every word. When she has to retrieve the dagger from the Pale Man's banquet hall, she is explicitly instructed not to eat any of the food that's on the table. She does, despite the insistence of her fairy friends, and this is why we can't have nice things, Ophelia. At the same time, though, isn't it kind of fucked up that she can't eat any of that food? Like, you know the Pale Man's not going to eat those grapes. He's pretty explicitly a carnivore. It's no coincidence that this creature is called the Pale Man, looks like Mitch McConnell, hoards more resources than it will ever consume, and can only see as far as it can grasp onto what it seeks to possess. Also, a pile of dead children's shoes? In war-torn 1940s Europe? What does that make you think of? Yes, she needed to obey the rules or else she would literally be killed, but why does it have to be this way? Is it okay that we live in a world where the only way to avoid being killed is to do what we're told, even if it doesn't make sense?
Obedecer por obedecer. Así, sin pensarlo. Eso solo lo hacen gentes como usted, capitán.
The faun's final task for Ophelia is to kill her newborn baby brother with the Pale Man's dagger. The faun insists that this is the only way to open the portal to the underworld, and if she doesn't do as he says, then she will grow old and die like every other mortal, as opposed to being a princess in a magical kingdom. Ophelia refuses, and at first it seems the worst has happened when the faun abandons her and Captain Vidal takes the baby and kills her. If you choose to believe that the supernatural elements of the film are real, then it's revealed that she passed a morality test the faun laid out for her, and she is reborn into the paradise where she rightfully belongs, getting a well-deserved happily ever after. If you choose to believe that these are fantasies used by a traumatized child to cope with her harsh reality, then her sacrifice allows the baby to live, and she dies happy knowing that she made the right choice. Pan's Labyrinth is perhaps the greatest deconstruction of fairy tales ever made, followed closely by The Last Unicorn.
But what if there isn't a happy ending at all?
There are no happy endings, because nothing ends.
And of course,
Shrek! Aaron Warner! Gosh, up until now I thought Monsters Incorporated was a documentary on the Weinsteins.
As I said earlier, Del Toro grew up Catholic and is now a staunch atheist. He claims his loss of faith came after seeing a pile of dead fetuses while volunteering at a hospital in Mexico, which probably explains why fetuses are a recurring motif in his films. Add that one to the drinking game, take 2 shots if it's in a jar. Of course, there's plenty of reasons to hate the Catholic Church. The Vatican was a willing participant in the Franco regime's rise to power. They even assisted in the interrogation and torture of Republican prisoners. Del Toro attributes this quote to an actual Catholic priest giving communion to POWs. "Remember, my sons, you should confess what you know, because God doesn't care what happens to your bodies. He already saved your souls." It's so fucked up that he even referenced it in Pan's Labyrinth.
A esa gente, Dios ya les ha salvado el alma. Lo que al cuerpo le suceda, bien poco le importa.
That being said, he's very open about the Catholic influence in his life and art. Mexican Catholic imagery is rooted in the juxtaposition of morbidity and beauty, from Jesus on the cross, to Santa Muerte, to Dia de los Muertos. Hellboy's rosary connects him to his adopted father, Professor Broom. He's a demon, inspired by a holy symbol to continue the fight for good, but not because he's a devout Catholic, but because it's connected to a man who taught him kindness, rooted in those principles. Another essential part of Catholicism is guilt. Del Toro grew up with a healthy awareness of original sin, and so naturally his villains feel the need to overcome their original sin. They seek the unattainable, they seek perfection. Del Toro believes perfection is a fascist ideal. and that most people who pursue perfection are the least happy and cause the most harm to those around them. In the Hellboy comics, Cronon is a minor Nazi henchman who wears a gas mask, but Del Toro decides to turn him into a walking mockery of the Nazi desire for purity. He's a sadomasochist, addicted to surgery, doing horrific things to his body in order to make himself the perfect killing machine. On Hell in Cronos is also obsessed with surgery, but in this case it's just rhinoplasty. At first, it seems like vanity, but we later see that his nose is constantly being broken by his abusive uncle. Perhaps a commentary on how corporations give us insecurities that we spend thousands of dollars to fix. Captain Vidal, like most fascists, wants to die a heroic death in battle so he can emulate his father, and he wants to pass on that legacy of heroism to his son. His father smashed his pocket watch so his son would forever know the moment he died, and Vidal has spent years fixing this watch so he can do the same for his male heir. He doesn't care about life. He's consumed by a fixation with building a legacy. He is living to die, and he wants to inspire generation after generation of people to live for death too, because that's what a hero does, right? Of course, when the rebels take his son, he gets denied this opportunity in the most satisfying way.
Decirle a qué hora murió su padre. Decirle que yo...
Ni siquiera sabrá tu nombre.
Strickland literally reads self-help books because he's hollow inside. He's done everything he was supposed to do. He's got a stable job, a nice car, a wife and kids, a house with a picket fence, and he feels nothing. All he wants is for someone to be proud of him, to feel like he's finally achieved something. Once he learns that he will never be good enough, he decides to do everything in his power to catch the amphibian man. If he, the square-jawed white dude who works for Uncle Sam, can't get a happy ending, why the fuck should this group of freaks get one? Lucille has manipulated her younger brother Thomas into an incestuous relationship with her since childhood, and then killed their mother when she found out. Thomas inherited Allerdale Hall, a worthless, crumbling mansion. In order to maintain their livelihood, home, and aristocratic titles, Thomas and Lucille began a marriage and murder scheme to get as much money as they could from doe-eyed heiresses and socialites. With Edith, however, he develops genuine affection. In her, he sees a kindred spirit, a creative soul reeling from rejection and tragedy like him. Thomas failing to impress anyone with his inventions, and Edith failing to get her book of ghost stories published. He realizes what he and his sister have isn't love, and he becomes the first of Del Toro's villains to have a moment of clarity and try and get out of their fucked up situation. But they aren't just villains, they're also victims, trapped in hereditary cycles of abuse, under the oppressive thumb of a society that demands perfection, a society that rewards cruelty and cunning to attain it. There are villains who don't quite fit this mold, but they're still given sympathetic motivations. Prince Nuada may seem like a whiny, entitled prince who wants to take over the world, but he's also watched for thousands of years as the human world outgrew and overpowered the supernatural world. He's watched creatures that have survived for thousands of years vanish to the point where mankind doesn't even acknowledge they ever existed. His father's willingness to compromise with humanity created this world, and he isn't going to make the same mistake. Del Toro didn't have a lot of story input in Blade 2, but he decided that when Scud betrays Blade, he should at least be able to give a compelling reason.
Pretty soon they're all going to be daywalkers, man. When that happens, I'd rather be a pet than cattle. You got me, B?
Jacinto's motivation is just to find a hidden stash of Republican gold, and he's pretty much an asshole from start to finish. But there's a kernel of sympathy in how pathetic he is. Nobody respects him, his boss, his girlfriend, his boss/girlfriend, and especially not the kids. Making a sympathetic villain is difficult, and in recent years, there's been a lot of push to make villains that are capable of being redeemed. As soon as it became a trend, of course, everybody and their mother wants their genocidal supervillain to pay lip service to the idea that they've got a good reason for it. Not everyone can make Zuko, guys.
It's trash.
But you can make a villain sympathetic without simping for them. Sometimes we can understand where a villain is coming from and decide that that makes them even more horrifying because they remind us of real villains, especially those in power. We feel bad about what these people are going through, but not so bad that we're upset when...
It's not a dud.
Oh, great.
That's rough, buddy.
Part 4. Monsters and Imperfection. I've managed to get this far in a video essay about Guillermo del Toro without saying monster 800 times. Del Toro has made good on his promise to be a friend to monsters. Even when the monster isn't heroic, he works with some of the best creature designers in the business, or he just designs them himself. This concept art was done by Wayne Barlow, whose work you may recognize from Avatar. I could do a whole essay on Barlow, but let's just move on. Check out his website, he's great. You ever wonder why Star Trek aliens look like humans with face paint and rubber stuff on their foreheads? Well, yes, budget reasons, but also because it's hard to cover an actor's face in rubber and get a decent performance out of them. Even if they could, we just inherently have a hard time relating to things that don't look like us. That's why good guy aliens usually look like babies, and bad guy aliens look like bugs. One of the most strange alien designs for a character the audience is supposed to sympathize with was the prawns from District 9. Christopher Johnson was the secondary protagonist of District 9. But how do you make an alien that looks like this relatable?
And stop staring at me with them big old eyes!
But CJ was done entirely with CG. Jason Cope was just there as a stand-in. Sure, you could do what they did with Smog, but you don't always get to make The Hobbit, do you, Guillermo? Besides, Del Toro was a makeup artist. He knows how to get a good performance out of someone in a rubber suit.
I think the best guys to perform in a suit in my mind are Brian Steele and Doug Jones. I play to their advantages. Doug is the rarest breed of actor and performer, but I would never have him play an action monster because he doesn't understand that language that well. He's great at slow-moving, elegant, vaguely menacing. Brian is physical. Brian is brutal. He's great at fights. He charges. He doesn't move. He charges. If you cast them correctly, you cannot just say, oh, they're good suit performers. I don't see Doug being able to do Mr. Wink, for example. And it's not a limitation, it's a specialization.
This leads us into talking about the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Doug Jones.
But you may not recognize my face because in all of those movies I was wearing a mask of some sort.
But I was in them. Trust me.
Fuck Laurence Olivier, fuck Meryl Streep, fuck every disciple of Stanislavski. Doug Jones is my favorite actor. This man has built his body around the art of acting through rubber foam. He's a great actor in general, but Lon Chaney wishes he could play a creature like DJ. I went to Monsterpalooza back in 2018 and heard the artists who work on The Shape of Water talk about the dream sequence. They hired a professional dancer, and the man did one pirouette in the suit before projectile vomiting. They said one of the most surreal things they've ever seen was one man in a fish suit vomiting into a bucket while another man in a fish suit comforted him. So, Doug just volunteered to learn to dance himself.
I never want to leave the creature makeups and costume work behind. I want to keep that as a part of my career as long as I can. If I die under rubber on a Guillermo del Toro film set, that would be a happy way to go for me.
You're breathtaking!
Designing the suit was a challenge, and Del Toro worked closely with the effects artists to do something impossible. Create a monster that you want to bone. One of the elements they stressed out about the most was giving him a nice butt.
Damn, boy, he's thick! Boy, that's a thick-ass boy! Damn!
Before you get grossed out, this isn't weird. This is a... This movie actually began as Del Toro's pitch for a remake of Black Lagoon. But Universal turned it down, so he took it to Fox and made Universal look like a bunch of fools. Del Toro saw the story as a romance, even as a child, and drew pictures of the Gill Man and Julie Adams riding tandem bicycles and getting ice cream. While being a typical B-movie monster flick, the romantic subtext is definitely intentional. The Spanish-language version of the film was titled La Mujer y el Monstruo, or The Woman and the Monster. The creature was even designed by a woman, Millicent Patrick, an artist for Universal in the 1950s, that until recently was uncelebrated for her talent. A pretty lady being carried off by a monster is a common trope in these kind of movies, going all the way back to King Kong. And it's not hard to notice that they use this exact same imagery to demonize foreigners and racial minorities. In fact, you don't even need to look to the past. Racists are still doing this shit today. I think you know where I'm going with this. What do monsters really represent? They represent something that we're afraid of, something we don't understand. They represent the other. H.P. Lovecraft was a massive influence on the horror genre, and he was also a massive fucking racist, homophobe, anti-Semite, misogynist, etc. And I'm not judging him by 21st century standards. Even for his time, he went overboard. Google H.P. Lovecraft's cat, I dare you. One of my favorite stories by him, The Shadow over Innsmouth, is about a man who discovers a small coastal town where locals worship a fish god named Dagon, and breed with his fishman spawn called the Deep Ones. The narrator discovers that he's got fishman genes in him too, and in typical Lovecraftian fashion, he goes insane. I should say that it used to be one of my favorite stories. That was until I found out it was an allegory for race mixing. Del Toro too was a fan of Lovecraft's mythos, and it's fitting that he made a movie where a human and a fishman falling in love is a beautiful thing, flying in the face of the bigoted coding of monsters past. Hellboy is a literal demon sent to bring about the apocalypse, but because of the kindness shown to him by Professor Broom, he chooses to fight for humanity. Side note, notice how he's hiding behind a statue of a cat as a baby, and as an adult he has a bajillion cats? That's production design, baby! He's not always thrilled about it. Part of Hellboy's charm is that he treats monster hunting like a blue-collar job. But he genuinely wants to do the right thing, and would like it if people appreciated what he did. Popular opinion seems to regard him as a curiosity at best, and an abomination at worst. Even when he's helping them, he just can't seem to catch a break. So when Nuada does the whole "we aren't so different, you and I" shtick, it actually works. Is this world really worth saving? Of course it is. For now. Del Toro said that part of his plan for a third movie was going to be Hellboy finally embracing his destiny and bringing about the end of this world and the beginning of a new one. I'm not sure if this was the thing that broke what seemed to be a really strong partnership between Del Toro and Hellboy's creator, Mike Mignola. But regardless, Mignola did not like where Del Toro was going with the movies, and so he decided to work with another filmmaker and do a reboot of Hellboy, which came out in 2019. I'm sure that turned out fine.
Oh, you thirsty bitch?
My grandpa, who was responsible for a lot of my movie taste, showed me Creature from the Black Lagoon when I was a child, because he wanted me to see a movie that scared him when it came out in 1954. I wasn't scared by the movie at all, far from it. I thought the Gill Man looked cool as hell, and I wanted him to get the girl. Obviously at the time, I didn't realize that I was a girl, and that I would want to get got by a fish man, but you know, childhood innocence. I felt for that lonely creature so desperate for connection. I loved monsters in movies for the aesthetic reasons that little boys who don't know their girls yet love monsters, but the older I got, the more I felt like a monster myself. I was a nerd, and I literally believed in Bigfoot and Nessie and fairies and other stuff like that, up until I stopped believing in God and became a suicidal teenager. I realized I was bisexual when I was 16, non-binary when I was 18, and a non-binary woman just last year at age 24. Oh, by the way, I grew up in Alabama, so I was straight up not having a good time. My first Del Toro movie was Hellboy, which was the first time I cared about superheroes, at all. Hellboy 2 I liked even better, and that's when I got into his filmography and learned how much he and I were alike. His movies made me feel seen in a way no piece of art has ever made me feel seen. They made me feel love. The kind of love that could pilot a Jaeger. The Shape of Water and I are drift compatible. When I hear that opening music, to me it sounds like being in a crowded airport and suddenly hearing the footsteps of a lover who's been gone for far too long. Hell, I got these two goobers tattooed on my arm. I started working on this video in June. This was originally a class assignment. We had to pick a favorite director and make a video essay or PowerPoint breaking down their filmography. And it's currently November 15, 2021 at 10:57 p.m. as I record this. I made a very, very, very rough version of this video for class and turned it in, and it was full of glaring, horrible editing errors, like sentences were colliding into each other, levels were way, way off. I mean, they're probably not even that good now, but believe me, this is a massive improvement over what it was in class. But my teacher, believe it or not, said that it was one of the best projects she'd ever received. And I was literally cringing, and I was literally curl up in a ball cursing at every minor flaw that came up. And I struggle a lot with self-hate. I am constantly criticizing myself. I don't create nearly as much as I want to because I constantly worry that it's never going to be good enough. And to be honest, even in this altered state, I'm not super happy with this video essay. But I'm gonna upload it anyway because Guillermo del Toro taught me that perfection is an unattainable fascist ideal, and this video essay is going to be as imperfect as all of us are. And to cap it off, I'm going to be reading from the foreword to his book At Home with Monsters. I am 52 as of writing this, and I'm still most at peace when I am with the oddities, the lost ones. I have devoted most of my life to preach their simple gospel. There is another world, a more forgiving and encompassing world where the arrogance of angels does not weigh so heavily upon our souls, and where reason sleeps and we thrive as the patron saints of imperfection.